I hope you're enjoying my YouTube channel, Surowicz Watercolor. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up to my mailing list where you can receive the latest information about my videos, online courses, workshops, coupons, and giveaways. Now through the end of 2019, I'll be providing early access to the subscribers of my mailing list as well as periodic exclusive tip videos. You can click on the link in the top right corner to sign up to my mailing list, or you can find the link in the description of this video. This is a narrated step-by-step tutorial for my painting Floral Falls. For this painting, I didn't use any reference material. I started with some sketches. I found one that I liked, and on this particular page in my sketchbook, I've drawn 4 small boxes that I can do thumbnail sketches, and I'm actually just repeating basically the same drawing. If you spend a lot of time on these thumbnail sketches, then you're missing the objective of using these, because it's not intended to create a work of art that you're going to frame. Not that you don't want it to communicate effectively your design, but they're just intended to be simple sketches. In this case, I'm doing the same design. It's literally a 60-second sketch, and I'm going to use these as a basis for doing value and color studies. Here are my 4 quick sketches. These are done on 98-pound mixed media paper in a sketchbook, and I've drawn it with a Pigma Micron pen size 3. And the nice thing about it is they dry quickly, it doesn't smear, and you can put a wash of watercolor on top of it and it doesn't run or bleed at all. Next, I'm going to use a wash of Payne's Gray and do just a quick value study. So I just have a round brush and I'm putting in a middle value wash here. And here I'm going to do another quick value study in this top right block. The first wash, which is a middle value, is dry. And now I'm going to come back in with a darker value. And here I'll put a few finishing touches on this study before moving on to the next one. And here I'm doing similar brushwork to the previous study. And this is just a planning stage. This is where I'm doing some of my problem solving. And here I'll put a few finishing touches on the second one before moving on to my color studies. Now I'm going to move on and do a color study. So instead of using Payne's Gray, I'm just going to use some colors from my palette and just give some suggestions of color. So I'm laying down some colors using some ultramarine blue and some mauve, and I'm going to put these cool tones down and dry it before I move on to some warmer colors. But while I have this paint, I'm going to start my second study also. So again, just experimenting, trying to do some problem solving, trying to decide the colors I'm going to use, what's going to be dominant, where the placement's going to be, and also with regards to the value studies. Now I'm going to come in with some of the warmer tones, and I'm just using some Halloween orange, some gamboge, and I'll be using a little sap green here. Just putting touches of some warm tones in the studies, and the cool tones are going to be dominant. Here I've moved over to the second study, and these 4 are all I'm going to do. You can do as many as you like until you get the result that you're after. So here are my studies after I've applied some of the warmer tones. I've used a combination of some violets, some blue violets, some blues, and I've worked on a little bit of green, and then I've used some yellows and oranges. And I'm going to use these studies as reference. In particular, more of my focus will be on the study in the bottom right hand corner. So this is my sketch. It's done with a B pencil on 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. And I've drawn the major shapes, the major floral elements, just giving the suggestion of a flower, and then some leafy shapes, and then a few linear marks here that start to give some indication of direction. I want to try and create a flow of motion coming through my composition. And as I've mentioned, I'm not using a reference photo for this. I'm just using my sketches and designs and my studies. And I'm just going to have a little bit of fun with this. And this is going to be mostly a stylized, abstract type painting with a floral element to it. There'll be a lot of positive and negative shape making. Before I continue, I'm going to do a quick review of the colors that I used. Ultramarine blue, mauve, royal blue, sap green, alizarin crimson quinacridone, quinacridone coral, quinacridone gold, gamboge, and Halloween orange. I'm going to begin this by working on some of the floral elements here, taking some ultramarine blue with a quill brush here just to give an indication of where some of the edges are along the edge of the petals. And then I'm going to come in with a spray bottle here and take a fine mist spray and soften this up. Just want to create the feeling at this stage of the edges and the softness of the flower. So I put the ultramarine blue down right along edges, and then I just mist over it with the spray. And I'm not really dragging it away at this point. Often I put my bottle down close to the paper and I spray and I pull and lift as I spray, especially when I'm trying to get direction. But in this case, I'm putting these darker marks down and I'm just misting over them and letting that paper, that brush mark that I've made, just soften up and dissolve a little bit into a softer edge. Those first brush marks were more on the interior edges of the floral element. Now I'm working around some of the outer exterior edges of these, and I'll start to follow some of these other shapes that I've drawn, and I'll start to create them as I go. This painting is very much going to develop as I move through my painting process. This isn't me trying to copy a photograph or a reference. A lot of this, most of it, will just develop through the painting process as I see shapes and create shapes and work with values and edges. It'll start to evolve into the finished painting that I'm after. Often I start with a large wash with a large brush and develop my painting from there and start working smaller. This is going to be similar, however, it's going to build differently. I'm starting with these light single color washes, and I'll start working in other colors. And it's still soft, it's still light, but in essence I'm going to build this foundation wash area by area rather than just take big brushes and apply it over the whole paper like I often do when I start a painting. At this stage, I've just used ultramarine blue, and I've applied these soft washes to start to define the edges of these major shapes, and you can start to see these shapes coming forward. It's a combination of hard edges, soft edges, and lost and found edges. And now I'll start to build some more color into this painting. Now I'm going to start to work with some mauve. And here again, I'm just putting some touches of color off some edges, and then I take the spray bottle and I wash that away from the edge. And that helps soften the edge going away. It helps diffuse the color, and it helps create some direction in my painting. If you look at what I've done so far, you can start to get a feeling of some motion coming through these flowers forward. I try to make them move from the left to the right, and I do that with my brush work, and I use the spray bottle to kind of pull and diffuse that color in the direction that I want it to go and where I want this composition to flow. The focus of this painting is really edge development and making decisions on when two shapes come together, how you're going to treat the resulting edge. Are you just going to outline it? Are you going to paint on the positive side, or are you going to paint on the negative side, so that you can differentiate the two shapes from one another and define the edge where they intersect? So it's not just outlining flowers or petals or leaves. It's letting some of these shapes run together, let them share a value or a color, and not just draw objects by themselves. You want to let shapes run into each other, and you want the edges to disappear, and you want to reappear, and you want the viewer to decide what's really happening in some of these situations without giving them all the answers. Now I'm going to continue to build this base wash using some warm tones. So I'm going to use some Halloween orange, some quinacridone gold, and some quinacridone coral. And just as I did with the other colors in the application of those earlier, I'm putting those along some of the edges that I wanted to find. Then I'm going to take that spray bottle, I'm going to diffuse that color, and a lot of times I'll try and move that color in a way that it enhances the feeling of that directional flow that I'm trying to achieve in my painting. And you can see how this fine mist spray will soften the application of my paint, and it will move it in a direction that I want, and it'll leave a hard edge on the other side where I want that to maintain a hard edge. Here I'm applying a few more touches of this warm yellow and orange tones. And now I'm going to come in with just a little bit of sap green. Not much, it's going to be a few touches of that. And I want to move that around the composition a little bit so it doesn't feel isolated. You can see again just a touch of paint, and then soften it with the spray bottle and diffuse it. You'll notice I can make a very small brush mark. Now this application of paint is very fluid when I load my brush here, but when I take that spray bottle, it really spreads it out. But it has to be a fluid mixture that I'm putting down, or it won't move as effectively as I want it to. Now one of the things I like to do, and I'll do it a few times in the painting process, is I'll take this somewhat stiff nylon brush that has a nice edge on it, and it's damp. It's not saturated with water, but it's damp, and I'll use it to do some lifting. I'll just make some linear marks here and there, and there's curved element to these that help move you through the painting and help reinforce that feeling of motion. So I'm lifting off this initial wash that I have here. The darker it is, the more contrast you have, obviously. At this light stage of a wash, it doesn't show as much. But I'll use these to help create shapes and identify shapes that I want to pull out of the composition as I continue to move through my painting process. This just gives me some ideas for shapes. Keep in mind, I'm not using any reference for this other than the studies that I had, the sketches and the studies that I had in my sketchbook. So a lot of this is created as I go, and as I make these marks, they start to intersect with the other lines that I have and other shapes, and they in turn create new shapes that I can experiment with and develop and help build this painting little by little. It's a time-consuming process to do a painting this way. Now I've dried this, and I'm going to come back in with my quill brush, and I'm working wet on dry now, so everything I've done prior to this is dry. And now I'm going to start to get a little bit more specific with my brush strokes. I'm going with a darker value, and I'll be using combinations of the ultramarine blue with the mauve, and I'll work on some alizarin crimson, and then I'll also be working with some darker value warm tones. But some of the brush work I'm doing now is going to start to further define the edges. It's going to make some hard edges, and there'll still be some soft edges, but I'm going to start to build my value. And as this evolves, there'll start to be more of a color dominance that will eventually take over in the overall painting. As I continue to develop this and put in darker values and harder edges, I still like to soften a lot of the edges, and I still like to diffuse that color, and it's actually starting to get, when I start to get to this value and this much color intensity in the mixture, it makes for a nice strong diffusion of color, and again it helps strengthen some of that feeling of motion. So here I'm going to go back on top of some of the softer brushwork that I've done here, and with a little bit darker value, a little more hard edge, use a little bit of lime, but I'm going to still soften that up a little bit with a spray. And in this case, I don't really want that to move around and it's as aggressively as I have when I'm diffusing that color, so I kind of spray straight above it and straight down on it with that soft mist, and it still dissolves a little bit, but it doesn't run and doesn't just go strongly in any one direction. I am working at about a 20-degree angle though, so any movement will be downward because of gravity. Here I've put down some mauve, and the marks are almost linear, but then when I spray on top of them they dissolve and just start to run a little bit. Now I'm going to start to enter into a phase where I really start to focus more on shape making and starting to define edges, and I let shapes define other shapes. Normally when I'm making a mark, I'm not just doing it arbitrarily without referencing what's going on around it. So as I make this mark, I'm using it to help define another shape. You can see here these two dark value marks I made, small marks, start to become the space in between starts to become the shape of a leaf. So these small shapes I'm making start to work together to define other shapes, and I try to keep that in the forefront of my thinking when I'm developing this. Again, I always try to let shapes define other shapes, and that's the whole part about working with positive and negative. Right now I have these large white floral elements, but I want some of them to be toned down, some areas, and make it look like there's some overlap going on or some shadows being cast. So I'll take some of the paint, I'll take a wet mixture here, and then I'll spray it and let some of that color run on top of some of these lighter shapes. And you'll see me, I often come back in and blot with a tissue when I feel I've got too much moisture. I want to remove some color that I've just put down. I'll just come in and I'll blot that out. As I continue to move around here, some of that area that I just put that wash on, is a little too much for me, so I'm gonna remove some of that just by blotting it and leave a little bit more of that white exposed, but I still keep some of that wash. And you can come back with the spray bottle and help soften that a little bit more, wash some away. Some of this gets very repetitive as I develop this, and it takes a while to go through it. So there's a stretch here where I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and you can see my brush marks and you can see it develop, and then I'll reach a point where I'll stop again and begin my narration. Alright, and I'm back to normal speed here. And you can see I've got a very dark value here. This is some mauve, and I have some royal blue that I'm using with it. And it's a very dark value. And as I mentioned, where I like to use shapes to define other shapes, that's a lot of what I'm doing right here. These little marks are starting to define some of these leafy shapes, and I almost carve them out by painting off the outside, the exterior edge of them. I almost call the exterior edge the negative edge, and it starts to define that shape. You can see how sometimes I'll put down a brush mark, and in this case it was along the whole edge there, but I don't want to be just the same all the way around the shape, so I'll blot it and I'll soften it in some spots and let it get lost in a few areas, and then strengthen it in other areas. Here you can see just by painting this value in, I've started to define that shape that's leading into it, that kind of a red violet leafy shape. That's a lighter value. And actually sometimes I'll put a dark kind of a positive shape underneath a light shape like that, and then it starts to define two shapes by putting the one in. Here I'm going to take this dark value. You can see I made a leaf shape there coming out from underneath the lighter shape. I'm going to go over here to the left side, and this is an area where I had lifted out one of the linear marks that I did earlier. So what I'm going to do is give the suggestion of a leaf shape underneath that area where I lift it out, so it makes it look like it's a vine or a stem or something crossing over top of the leaf shape by painting off the exterior edge of that mark. So it strengthens the contrast and makes that shape more pronounced. And I'm not just going to do that type of brushwork with just the darker cool tones. Here I'm using some of this warmer colors here. This is quinacridone gold with a little alizarin crimson in it. But I'm getting the same effect here. I'm creating that leaf shape and giving the suggestion of a vine or something going over top of it by painting off the edges of the exterior edge of that linear mark. And here I'm going to put a few more of those in. And this isn't an easy way to paint. There's a lot of imagination that goes into it, and to me it's just designing with shapes. Here I've added a little bit more alizarin crimson to this warm mixture to give me a deeper value warm tone. And here you can see I'm just painting some smaller shapes, and I've left a space there to make it look like there's a vine going between those two flowers behind them. And I'll make some marks and I'll carry them to an edge, and then I'll pick of a shape, and I'll pick it up on the other side of that shape just to make it look like it's continuing on. If you look in the one area where I'm working right now, you can see there's some hard edges, some soft edges, there's some ultramarine blue, there's some mauve, there's some orange there, and there's a variety of values. There's light, middle, and dark values, and there's large and small shapes. So there's a lot of variety going on within this composition. And as you get to some of these areas, I'll take some of these small marks and I'll just use them to strengthen where two shapes come together and where they intersect. This is a point where I start making some decisions about contrast and depth, and are there some areas that are too much the same and I need to push some areas back more and help bring other areas forward. And I'll do that sometimes with glazing. So here I'm taking ultramarine blue and putting some large shapes down, and I'm going to soften that up and diffuse that color around a little bit with a fine mist spray, and it's just going to glaze over a larger area. You can see here I soften the edge a little bit and I let it run. Now I'm going to continue. I've done quite a bit of glazing on this, but I'm going to continue to put down some very fluid brush marks. And I'm going to take that spray and soften and more importantly diffuse some of that color. And by doing so, it's going to tone some of the contrast in some of those areas down. So here you can see I'm painting on the edge on either side of this linear mark that I got from lifting. And now I'm going to take this spray, I'm going to just let that run down a little bit. I'm going to put some more up here. So I'm strengthening that edge of that leaf shape. And then at the same time, when I bring in a spray, I'll diffuse some more of that color down with some softness to it. This area up to the left here, I'm going to work to tone some of that area down So here again, I'm painting on the either side of some of these linear marks. I'm laying down some fluid color, and now when I spray that, it will cover some of those lighter value areas up, and it starts to make that area recede. At the same time, that leafy shape that I painted around is starting to come forward. You can see in the area I'm painting now, that might be an area where some people would tend to think it's already a dark value, but you can see as I paint that how much darker I can go. So that area that's at more of a red violet is more of a middle value. It's not even close to really being a dark value yet. And I'm going to glaze over quite a bit of this area to the left using some ultramarine blue with a little bit of mauve mixed in and even some touches of royal blue. But I want this area here to the left to recede a little bit more. And I want to lessen some of the contrast there. If everything, the relationships between shapes and values are the same everywhere, it's hard to distinguish depth and make out foreground, middle ground, background. So when this dries, you'll still be able to see the brushwork that I've done underneath and the shape making that I've done, but you won't have near the contrast that I have in some of these other areas where I have maintained the lighter values and even the white of the paper. I want to push this area here in the lower left back a little bit and lessen the contrast. So just as I did up above on the top left, I'm taking some of this darker value ultramarine blue with a little royal blue in it, and I'm going to spray that and let that glaze over top. I want to bring a little bit more paint in here because I want to get some more of that area toned down. And now I'm going to just diffuse that a little bit, let it run together. I want some of that same effect off of some of these edges of the floral element here. So I'll put some of that dark value mixture down, not as big an area, and then I'll diffuse that color with a spray. And I'm going to pick up that quality up and towards the top right a little bit too. So I'll take some of that same ultramarine mixture and put a little touch up here. Not too much. And then I'll just spray that and I'll let that color run a little bit. It's hard to get that diffused color when you're just using a brush to soften an edge and clear water. You can do it, but I don't think it diffuses and gives that nice kind of a glazing effect that you get, almost a halo effect with the spray bottle. I'm going to tone down some more of that contrast, but this time I'm using a warm glaze to lessen the contrast in this area. So I've applied this warmer mixture here, and then just as I did with the cooler mixture, I'm just diffusing that color a little bit, letting the paint run, and I'm taking away some of the whiter whites in that area and just leaving a middle value as opposed to just a light area. And I just want to strengthen the intensity too of the yellow orange that I have there. One of the finishing elements I like to add to some of these compositions are some grassy linear shapes that I put in here using a rigger brush. And some of them are turned sharper, they are sharper radius than others that have a larger radius. And I think it just moves you through the painting a little bit, helps again reinforce some of that feeling of motion. And here I'm using a dark warm tone here, but I'll also use some of the blue and the mauve tones also. So I have a number 1 rigger brush, and again you'll see how some areas I'll stop at one edge of a shape and I'll pick it up and I'll pick it up on the other side just to make it look like there's overlap. Here I switch to a cooler tone, so I have some of the dark blue here. It's a mixture of ultramarine blue with some royal blue in it, and I'm also using some of the mauve too for some of these. And you can see how I let some of a few of those marks just drape over top of that floral shape. So to me, it helps, that overlap helps build depth, and you can establish a variety of layers in this painting. So now I've reached the end of my painting process, and you can compare here looking at my study. I started with the value, then I did some color studies, and you can see how that was just a general guideline to help me develop this painting. And you can see that the dominance and the colors used are pretty consistent with that very simple study that I began with. And I'm going to put a white mat on this to frame it in. And there's my painting, Floral Falls. If you want more information about my materials, you can go to the studio page of my website, rsurowiczart.com. If you have specific questions, you can email me at contact@rsurowiczart@gmail.com. There's 4 cards appearing here at the end of this video that will take you to more videos or give you more information. You can click on one to sign up to my mailing list, and there's another that will take you to my online learning center if you want to learn more about my online courses. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.